The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is our third EPIP webinar of the 2014 year. It's an hour with our newest executive coach, Pratichi Shah. I am your host for this afternoon's festivities, Michael Barham. We're going to be getting started shortly, but before we do, we've got just a few things we want to check up on. First, for those of you unfamiliar with EPIP, we are a national network of foundation professionals and social entrepreneurs who strive for excellence in the practice of philanthropy. Our mission is to develop emerging leaders committed to building a just, equitable, and sustainable society. Some announcements. Many of you joining us may know about our 2014 National Conference. It's the Unity Summit this year. We're partnering with the joint affinity groups. It'll take place on June 5th through June 8th. Registration is now open, and as always, there's a ton of information available on our website. So please visit us, epip.org. If you have questions, you can also email me, michael@epip.org. We've also got a webinar coming up in about 2 weeks. It'll be March 26th at 3 p.m. again, and that's going to be catalyzing change through communications and comedy. We've got a stellar communications firm joining us in 2 weeks, and they're a lot of experience with foundations, with nonprofits, and in the political arena, and working with celebrities as well, like Samuel L. Jackson. So they're going to take us through the communications field, tell us a lot about how foundations and nonprofits can use communications effectively. And as always, for events near you, please check out the website epip.org/events. Those of you who are joining us and are not EPIP members, we're encouraging you to join. For more information, epip.org/membership. You can contact me as well. There's my email. I'm here for all sorts of questions. Before we actually begin, a few items of housekeeping. We're keeping all of you on mute. If you are calling in on the phone, please make sure to mute your computer to avoid any echo. As you know, our second segment of this webinar will be a Q&A with Pratichi. Some of you, and thank you for those who did, submitted questions in advance. If you have questions during the broadcast, please submit them. We'll hang on to them and try and fit them in during the Q&A portion. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please use your question box, and we'll be sure to address them for you. And as we always do, we're recording this webinar, so if for any reason you have to jump off in advance or before the webinar ends, you'll be able to access that on our website, and we'll send out more information on that after the webinar. So moving on, today's speaker is Pratichi Shah. She's the president and CEO at Talent Management Solutions. Prior to launching Flourish Talent Management Solutions, Pratichi was the Chief Talent Officer for Independent Sector, and she has 20 plus years of experience in the field. And we have a lot of attendees who are very excited to pick Pratici's brain for a bit. We're going to pass it over to her shortly, but before we do, we have a few poll questions that we're going to jump to today, and we're going to get started by asking you all a quick poll question about your level of competence and where you feel you're strongest. So I'm going to launch that now. Please participate. And we'll give you about 30 seconds. And looks like those of you are voting. Please vote while you can, and we'll be able to share all the results with Pratichi and with everyone. All right, folks, almost everybody participated, and I am sharing those results. Pratichi, can you see those results?
I can.
Okay, great. So you can get kind of a sense of where
Hmm.
people feel like they're strongest. And without further ado, Pratichi, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. So I'm feeling good about the leadership of the sector. It looks like you guys have a lot of skills in the strategic and analytical side, and then in the influence and fundraising side. So I'm feeling really good about the future of the sector and all the leaders that we have on the phone. So this is fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about kind of being a leader. And in particular, I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about EPIP's measure of a leader. I think it's actually really amazing that EPIP has put this together. One of the things that we don't do enough of is think from a sector-wide perspective. And this really gets to that to say, okay, so then what does a leader look like? And what are we willing to say and kind of put a stake in the ground to say, look, these are the things that are absolutely critical for a leader, and this is how they would show up. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for this. I got to have a tiny bit of input into it as well, which was a good thing and a fun thing for me. Um, and I think that the fact that we have that to work from really also helps all of you who work with EPIP because it gives you something to go on that isn't just in the organizations, because chances are good that you'll move through organizations, and this really gives us kind of a common framework that goes throughout the sector. So I actually really love this, and I wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about it. And really talking about, so if this is the model, if this is the competency model, if you will, or the skills model for what a leader looks like, what does that mean for us? So a lot of you said that you were really, that you felt pretty strong in kind of that strategic analytical area, again, which is great. It's one of the most critical things. I often have people ask me, and this is literally something that people ask me all throughout whatever level of their career. I have had this question from vice presidents to people at kind of an associate level, manager level, director level, and everything, to say, so how do I think more strategically? What does it mean if I say that I'm strategic? Because we use the word all the time and it's become almost meaningless in its term because we use it all the time. So I like the idea of having models in your back pocket to use if you're struggling with kind of, okay, how do I bring something strategic on into this? How can I be more strategic? How can I be more kind of critical thinking? How can I introduce that a little bit better? And the answer to that is, honestly, think from the largest picture that you can and then drill down. So I've worked with coaching clients, and we've talked about different models that really work for them. Um, we've talked about models that work for them as far as critical thinking. Some people like the, what is this issue going to look like in 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? And then others think about, what does this look like from 5,000 feet, 7,000 feet, 10,000, 25,000? So whatever works for you, find a way that you can analyze something with different lenses, with different time frames, and different areas of focus. Okay, let me move on, and let's talk a little bit about the others. That one I wanted to spend a little bit of chunk of time on because I wanted to make sure that it's such an important one. So all of these others, I think, what's great is that these are things that you can find ways to address in all of your work all of the time. So if you're looking for leadership and management, the great thing is about nonprofits, you get to basically put forward your leadership skills on a whole bunch of things, right? Because there's never an end to the amount of work to do. And because we tend to be typically small organizations, there's all kinds of opportunity for leadership. So ask yourself, what is there that I can lead, that I can manage, that I can take over to show my leadership skills? Same thing goes for communications. I hear people say this all the time, like, oh, I'm not sure that I'm a great communicator. And I think several of you had said that you were really good at influencing and fundraising. And I think this one was kind of in the mix too, is kind of the top three. What I tell people all the time is on communication skills, think about it in everything that you do. So even when you're dashing off an email, think about how it's written. I mean, that I know that's like basic communication 101, but it still counts, right? And it's definitely an impression of who you are and how well you communicate. So again, just bottom line in all of these is think about them really purposefully. What are where are places where you can be innovative? Where can you put forward your best communication? Where can you kind of bring creativity to problem solving? Where can you be an influencer? And think about all the skill sets that go into being an influencer and fundraising, like relationship management, and constantly ask yourself, so what's an opportunity that I can see that in which I can demonstrate this skill set? Okay, let's talk a little bit about development in general and how we, beyond the measure of the leader and tying into it, let's talk a little bit about, so well, how am I going to develop myself, right? Like you're in an organization, they may have some kind of formal development, they may not. So let's talk a little bit about the ways in which you can develop yourself. The first thing I always like to tell people, and this too, I tell people this, whether they've been in the work world for 5 years, 15 years, or 25, 30 years, is to get out of your comfort zone. So this is really something that all of us struggle with, right? Because comfort zones are comfort zones for a reason. They're comfortable and cushy and nice. And the question is how much are you willing to stretch yourself? Not just in your area as far as your comfort zone. So if you're a program person or a fundraising person or a communications person or a marketing person, it's not just a question of coming out of your area as far as your comfort zone, but also your skill set. It may even be your personal characteristics and qualities. That's not to say that you shouldn't be you. It's adding different things to your portfolio. So if you're someone who typically says, look, I'm not, I tend to participate in activities, I don't tend to lead them, is there a way that you can lead them? So if you're attending networking events, is there a different skill set that you want to try out as you network? So not be the one that's waiting for people to come talk to you, or not being the one to start the conversation, but trying something else. I think the key thing about developing yourself is constantly challenging yourself to get out of your comfort zone. And again, remember that it's not about not being you, it's all about adding to your portfolio. A long, long time ago when I used to work in the corporate world, I got really good at attention to detail because the corporate culture was such that you really had to pay very close attention. What I found is I would kind of stay there. After a couple of years, I was really good at that. So I was like, okay, I'll do the quality control on that presentation, or this white paper or whatever. And because it was so comfortable, it was like, oh, good, look, I added value. And I didn't push myself until I had a mentor that said, you know what, you're spending too much time doing that and you're not contributing in other ways. So I share that story not to bore the living daylights out of you, but to just say, look, there are lots of ways that we're doing this. Be really cognizant of those and make sure that you're giving yourself the opportunity to kind of get up out of the big comfy chair. So, Michael, you had a question about this, yeah, for the audience today?
Yes, we do happen to have a question about this very topic. So let's jump to that poll question. Everyone, please look out for that. You were so quick to respond before. So I'm going to launch this second poll question. How often do you take yourself out of your comfort zone? So please participate in that, and then we'll be able to share the results with the group. Okay, great. So it looks like a lot of people kind of fall there in the middle area. Pratichi, you should be able to see those results as well. Yep. Very few people very often taking themselves out of their comfort zone. So a lot of people in that middle area, like I said.
That's great. That's great. I would love to tell you that I was always a sometimes person, but I feel like there have definitely been times that I was a rarely, infrequently person. So I think that's fantastic. If you guys are already going there, that's great. It's going to serve you well. And the good news is, as I think in our sector, there's probably more opportunity to do that than less, because we're often called upon to do so many things. So let's talk a little bit about leveraging that. So you have the measure of a leader, you're getting yourself out of your comfort zone. Let's talk a little bit about how you want to make the most of your current experience and how you are kind of managing your own development, right? Because it may or may not happen formally. It may not happen formally through your organization. And if it doesn't, you pretty much get to be in charge of your development. So let's talk a little bit about how do you manage your career and your enrichment and your development. I like to think of it via this model, kind of in 3 layers, right? These are the 3 things that you're monitoring. If you're working in an organization, there's you, because there's you. There's the area in which you're working. For some of you, that may be, it may overlap with the entire organization because you're working in a really small organization. So you touch all of the areas. For some of you, if you're working in a bigger organization, then it may be a department or a functional area or something like that. But there's you, there's the area in which you work, and then there's the entire organization, right? So how do you interact with each of those, and how do you manage yourself so that you're constantly learning and thinking about enriching yourself and getting yourself to the next level? And we're going to go through these one by one, and I want to share with you some thoughts and ideas that I've collected over the years as to how to do that. So let's start with kind of that layer of the organization, right? We all, at some level, we're all working in an organization. It might be small, it might be large, it might have a $300,000 budget, it might have a $30 million budget, whatever the case may be. So let's talk a little bit about what is it that you need to do in an organization. And I think the first thing is really understanding the entire landscape in which your organization works. So not just the organization itself, but kind of the bigger picture outside, right? So because in doing this, when you kind of keep your eye on all of these things, you're actually setting yourself up to be a leader. This is essentially the first part of leadership development. So knowing that landscape, understanding, who else is out there, who else does the work that we do, who are our primary funders, who are the constituents we serve. They seem like really obvious questions. I completely understand that. But there are a lot of times that we get really caught up in what is on our desk because there's usually too much. And it's really easy to lose sight of that kind of larger, external, bigger picture. The other thing is to really know your organization's value proposition, right? So what does your organization do that others don't or can't? What is it that you all bring to the party that nobody else can, right? And part of that is also understanding what's on leadership's mind. So are they concerned about budgetary issues? What's the relationship with the board like? What are the functional areas in your organization, if you have functional areas? And what I mean by those are infrastructure areas like marketing or HR or anything like that, finance, any of those. So what's on leadership's mind vis-a-vis any of those areas? And then understand all of the organization's work, not just kind of where you sit and where you might be, but all of the areas and how they work together. So if you have a communications department, how does program work with communication? If you have a policy footprint, then how does policy feed programs, and how do they all work together to serve your constituencies or your grantees? And how do those things all get done? How do issues get bubbled up? So you really want to kind of think about that. You also want to know how things get done in the organization. So by understanding how things get done, obviously you're going to work more effectively, but you're also going to be able to navigate more effectively, which is going to make you more of a standout. Right? So, and you're going to be able to take that information, all of this information, and you're going to have that in your knowledge base as you work towards your own leadership role. So especially for those of you who are on a leadership track and feeling like, look, in a few years, I'm going to run either my own area, if you're not doing so already, my own organization, I'm going to start my own organization, learning the lessons of what's going on at your organization at the largest level, maybe not the highest level, you may not have access to that. But at the largest level is absolutely going to feed your own knowledge library for what you may want to do in building your organization or in running an organization or running an area down the road. So it is really keeping in mind kind of all of the big picture stuff. Okay? All right, so let's move further on down that model and talk a little bit about the area in which you work. So as you think about your area, and again, this is kind of, I know it won't apply to everybody because all of you are probably not in organizations that are big enough to have unique areas or departments. But for those of you who have a specific area or an area, even an area of responsibility, what we really want to do in that is think about, so what are the ways that I am going to begin to show leadership and again, further build out my own knowledge base, right? So how am I going to leverage the fact that I work in with grantees on their programs, or I work in fundraising, or I work in financial management, or any of those things, or I work in policy? How am I going to leverage that to really further my career over time and to really develop myself into the professional that I want to be? So the first thing is to think collaboratively. Out of all the organizations that I've worked with, there isn't one that doesn't describe itself as collaborative. And just so that you all know, I work only with nonprofits and philanthropies. They all describe themselves as collaborative. A lot of us tend to be really small, and all the more reason, right, that we have to be collaborative. So thinking collaboratively from the beginning and not getting caught up, even if an organization has silos, be thinking about, okay, so because we have silos doesn't mean that I necessarily have to live within those silos, is ultimately going to help. Every leader that I've ever interviewed has said that their ability to collaborate with lots of different people outside of their area was a key factor in their success. So think also about the biggest picture as you do your own work. So how does anything that you do tie back to the mission of the organization, to its overall strategic plan, to the priorities of leadership, right? So you have your stuff, but the question is, how does it fit into the bigger picture? On that same note, you want to give really big answers when you're pulled into work, right? So if you're asked to do something, if you're asked to lead a project or to do a particular task, what are the long-term effects of that? Can you tie those pieces of what you're doing together? Can you give people more information than what they were asked for? So if you can give really big answers instead of kind of focusing on just what people are asking for, time and time again, when I hear about organizations talking about what makes someone a really high potential and a high performer and someone that they really want to target for leadership, it has so much to do with that they deliver more. And from a knowledge base, they tell me more and they share more information than is asked for. And they do it in a respectful way. So kind of tied into that is really being a service provider. So when you're working with colleagues, it's thinking in terms of almost like customer service, right? So how do I provide excellent service? How do I really kind of make sure that everybody's happy with the work that I do and make sure that everybody feels like, hey, you know what? I asked such and such to help and I got that help and I got even more than that. A part of that is also making sure that you get the help that you need. So find what your support system is, whether it's inside the organization in your area. So if you need help, if you need help from an expertise point of view, make sure that you're finding that help as far as your own content area, right? So think about from your own colleagues, outside of your colleagues, etc. Get the help that you need and make sure that you have that to lean on as you kind of develop yourself and as you expand your own knowledge base. Okay, so let's look at the base of this pyramid, and what's at the base of that is you, right? And this is what you're going to be managing throughout, whichever area you're working in, whatever organization you're working in. These are the things that you're going to be doing to further your own brand, to further your own development, and to further excel as a leader and really establish yourself as a leader. I always call this kind of my 5L model. The first thing is to look, and it really is to be a very keen observer at how people do things, what works, what doesn't. You're not going to adopt their style, but you can adopt aspects that you think are successful and that you think will work for you and that will work for you given your personality and your strengths. So really be an observer, not just of the people in your organization, but other people that you think of as maybe role models or as kind of not role models so that you know what not to replicate. Think about listening, really, really keenly listening. And this one is so obvious that we think, yeah, well, we all listen. I mean, that's all we do all day, right? Is we work, we talk, we listen. But really listen for the things that people tell you, especially about you and about your work. I always say it's kind of the rule of three, right? When you hear a piece of feedback 3 times, it's time to start paying attention and very close attention on the constructive side, on the success side. When you hear it, really pay attention and really hear what people are telling you. Learn about everything all the time, especially the organization that you're in right now, especially its context, but also think about what your skill gaps are and how you need to be learning to fill those skill gaps. Think about where you can learn more. Where is your support system in the learning? Where is the network from which you can learn? It doesn't have to be people that are exactly like you. It doesn't have to be traditional means of learning. We often look at this and say, well, there's no professional development here, or there is, but I've already kind of attended that, or I've gone to this conference a bunch of times. Think outside all of that. I would really encourage you to think about where else can you learn? Who could be a good mentor to you? You know, who could provide you with some coaching? Do you want a mentor that's within philanthropy and within nonprofit, or would you consider a mentor that's outside of that? So there are lots and lots of places from which we can learn, and I think sometimes we kind of limit ourselves by thinking in the most traditional ways. So what I would really encourage you guys to do is to get out of that and think about, okay, so what is the most, what are the ways that I can learn that may not look anything like traditional learning? So really look for places also to lead. And I think that one tends to be tough. If you don't have formal authority to lead either a project, an area, a function, a particular task, a convening, I think that it can get frustrating. And so what I would say is, are there ways that you can show leadership? Again, thinking about it non-traditionally. Is there something for which you can take ownership? Because someone hasn't taken ownership yet, because you have something particular to add? Is there a way that you can show thought leadership? Is there a way you can show people leadership? Is there a way you can show leadership by speaking up first? There are lots of different ways to lead. It's not always just about the formal authority and the formal kind of title. So I really encourage that you look at places that you can lead and distinguish yourself. That's absolutely going to also be part of building your brand. Because if we wait for it to come formally, that may be years on down the line. Or it may not be within the organization you're in, but maybe there is something there, even if it's not formal. And finally, leap, right? So this is the one that is what we were talking about before, that is about not sitting in the comfy chair. It's taking a risk. It's forcing yourself to do something that you haven't done. It's forcing yourself to think about something in a way that you hadn't thought about it in the past. For me, this came several years ago when I left the corporate world to come to the nonprofit world. And it was definitely a leap. I didn't know what I didn't know. I've loved it ever since. It's the best thing I've ever done for my career and for myself and for my own fulfillment. It's been amazing. But I definitely was conscious of the fact that I became a very serious learner all over again. New vocabulary, new players, new ways of getting things done, new revenue models that I had to understand, all kinds of things. But the leap was so worth it. I wouldn't leave the sector for anything. For me, that was my version of the leap. Find out what yours is. Find out what yours is, and think about how you want to enact that.
That's great, Pratichi. I think actually this is a good time to jump into a few more poll questions. We actually have two we'd like to learn a little bit about what you all are most comfortable doing in terms of professional development, and where you might want to branch out a bit. So if you can bear with us, we're going to run a few back to back and try and answer quickly for us. So first question, what is your preferred method of professional development? Okay, great. Looks like most of you have participated, so I'm going to close that poll and share the results. Not a lot of people want to attend a conference, apparently. but looks like we have a mix among the other options. Okay, great. And
That's great. That's really smart too. Pursuing on-the-job stretch assignments and mentoring is so, so smart. Those are two of the most powerful ways to develop. So I'm really delighted to see this. Kudos to you guys.
great. And then let's jump into the final poll question. We're interested in what activities you all are interested in engaging in for learning outside the traditional categories. So I'm going to launch that poll right now, and please let us know what you're interested in. All right, folks, thanks again for participating. I'm about to close that poll. Looks like another similarly even split. A lot of folks interested in peer coaching, mentoring, learning activities outside the sector, but not necessarily self-directed study. Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone
So
for
nobody
participating.
wants to. What's that, Michael? Sorry.
No, I was just thanking everyone for participating. Pratichi's had a chance to view these results as well.
Indeed.
All right, so let's bounce back to the PowerPoint.
Okay.
There you go.
So one thing I wanted to touch on again, I think it's great that you all are both willing to pursue different kinds of learning, and that you already are, based on your preferred. I'm hoping that means that you're engaged in those activities, and I think that the ones that you find that are your preferences are the ones with the biggest payoff too. So I think that's fantastic. And good for all of you who said that you're willing to look at things even outside of the sector. I think that's really important as well, to stay balanced, and because increasingly the sectors are not as kind of separate as they used to be. So I think the more that we get to make those walls permeable, the more everybody gets to learn something. So I think that's actually a really big takeaway as well. So let's talk a little bit about balance before we get to your questions. And I definitely want to leave time to get to your questions. And when we hear the word balance, I feel like in a professional context, we immediately think in terms of, oh, work-life balance. And I think that's important. Obviously, I think that's hugely important, because everyone should have fulfilling work and a fulfilling life, and that's a good thing. I want to talk a little bit about other kinds of balance that I would just say, let's keep this in mind and find your own balance among these other kind of continua, which are the balance, for instance, between strategy and tactics. As you think about the big picture, and then also what's currently on your plate, there is, you have to do the tactical stuff to get the work done, and then you have to marry it back to the big strategy, because your work is part of that strategy. And it's always about finding the balance. The portfolio and your specific portfolio in that balance is going to change as you take on more of a leadership role. And if you're running your own organization, it changes dramatically. But keep that in mind, that continuum is always going to be part of the mix. Same thing with something like paying attention to the big picture and still being kind of in the weeds on details, and making sure every I is dotted and every T is crossed, but not losing yourself in that, and making sure that you can also zoom out and see the big picture, so that you are thinking in an innovative, creative, and strategic way. Again, that is going to change as well, depending upon the position that you have. Another balance that always comes to mind when I am working with people, whether they're at the emerging leader stage of their career or the executive stage, or anywhere in between, is quality and time. Sometimes you give up a little bit on time, is in it, things go longer and they're higher quality, things go shorter and maybe they're not perfect quality, but where does whatever you're producing need to be? It's not a conversation that we have a lot in the sector, but it's a reality of life, because everything can't take infinite time. So think about your own work and your own portfolio, and where does it matter? Where does it really matter that the quality be very high, and what needs to give on the time frontier in order for you to dedicate the time to the things that really matter? So think in terms also as you kind of navigate your career path, think in terms of your needs, but also the organization's needs and how you want to balance that. So there are going to be times when the organization's needs are going to come first, and there are times that you need to put yours first, and there are times that they're going to be pretty much neck and neck, and you have to find the right balance for all of that. Think about the balance that you want to achieve between having confidence, which I think is such an appealing quality, especially in a leader. And I think most of us would cite that as something that we look for in colleagues and in leaders and in supervisors, but also balancing that with humility, right? And I hear this a lot, is people say that is one of the most important things that they're looking for, is someone who has confidence, but still has enough humility to be vulnerable and say, hey, look, you know what? I actually don't know. Or, okay, I made a mistake, and we'll own up to it. So really think about kind of where you are on those and how you want to strike that right balance. And then finally, think about everything that you do as both an art and a science, right? There's kind of a process to everything that we do. So how do you stay true to a process or kind of that science side, and then still let yourself have some leeway for the artful side? Because a lot of what we do is both art and science, because a lot of it is interpersonal, and interpersonal tends to be that. So what's the balance that you all want to create between art and science? Okay, so that is just something to consider, or a series of things to consider as you kind of, again, build your own brand and develop yourself as a leader. I do want to get to your questions right now. So we're gonna pause for some questions and take yours. And I think, Michael, are we still taking questions as well?
Yeah, we've actually received a few questions, so I think it's a perfect time
Great.
to shift gears. We can also put up this quote from Gandhi, so encouraging you all to be inquisitive if you're not inspired by Gandhi. I don't know who would inspire you, but let's before we get to the questions that were
Yeah,
submitted.
community activist at its best.
Exactly. So before we get to the questions that were submitted in advance, we had a couple, and they might be really pertinent now, and I'm sure you kind of touched on some answers already, but I'd like to at least address them. I think we'll have enough time. We have about 20 minutes left, so we'll have enough time to get to everything, hopefully. So one
Hmm.
question came in from Ashley early on, and she asked, "How do I ensure my ideas are conveyed and considered by leadership?"
Oh, that's such a good one. Ashley, thank you so much for that. So, how do I ensure my ideas are conveyed and considered by leadership? I think this goes back to in that kind of upside down pyramid slides. Know how things get done in your organization. So when you think about your organization, how do things get done? Is it formal? So for instance, are people kind of submitting ideas in a very formal way through specific channels? Is it a, hey, let's all get together and share thoughts and kind of have a free-for-all brainstorm? That's the first step, is really understanding what's the culture here, and how do things work, right? How do I get the gears in motion? And then it's working within that to make sure that you are distinguishing yourself and your ideas. So just because you understand how things go doesn't mean that you have to stay only to those things, but you want to stay enough within the parameters of your culture that it's not kind of dismissed as, okay, well, whatever, that's so outlier that we can't even consider it, especially if your culture is one that is not a fan of that kind of behavior. So I think it's first understanding what does the organization do and what's on leadership's mind, and then timing it right. So depending upon what's on leadership's mind at any given time, if you all are getting ready for a big convening or training for your grantees or a board meeting or whatever the case may be, probably not the best timing, obviously. So I think you have to consider the timing. And then I think you have to consider your ideas, where do they fall within the priorities of the organization? So do you have a really great idea about something that's a burning platform? Then I think you can approach it with some more urgency. And are you trying to solve a pain point? Right? So that's what we often think about with our constituencies, right? Is the organization is basically trying to solve a pain point for a community, for a particular segment of society. So if you're trying to solve a pain point, can you make that clear as to what pain point you're solving? The other thing is to be really succinct. I know it's like you're trying to convey all of that and yet still be succinct. But I think leaders really appreciate that. Leaders really appreciate their time being used well. So if you can kind of pay attention to the overall lay of the land, the context, the timing, what problem you're trying to solve and why your idea makes so much sense, and then present it in a really succinct way, I think that those are all things that makes your idea or your thought process, I think, go to the top of the pile.
That's a fabulous answer. Thanks, thanks, Pratichi. We'll jump to
Yeah, thank
the
you.
questions submitted in advance, but I'd like to get to one more. We had another question. I'm sure this is on a lot on the mind of plenty of folks. But do you have advice on how to advocate for yourself at your current job based on accomplishments and performance if you happen to work in a place that doesn't necessarily reward for performance? So that's kind of a challenging question, but I'm sure it's on the mind of some folks. So if you have any thoughts on that, Pratici, I'm sure people would really
Yeah, that's
like to
such a
hear
good
that.
question, and I'm certainly have a lot of sympathy for what you're going through and empathy for it as well. I think you start with where you're going to find your allies and what you need to learn. Again, going back to kind of what do I know about the organization and how things get done and what is the priority. So, are there some folks that you can talk to get some in organization advice for what does get rewarded and how one could advocate for oneself without being dismissed? Because I think that that's one of those very tricky things, and I'll be really honest with you, done at the wrong time and in the wrong way, it can be dismissed, and then you're kind of further back than where you started, and that stinks. And it may not be the way that you presented it, but it can be interpreted like that. So you don't want to end up there. So I think if you get the vibe that the organization doesn't put a premium on high performance, and yet you want to have a conversation about your performance and your contributions, then I think you tread carefully. I think you tread slowly, and I think you create some allies in saying, hey, you know what, I really like your feedback. How do I do this? And I think you also solicit feedback on your work. And once you have solicited feedback on your work, I think you can take it back to, if not your supervisor, then someone else with whom you would feel comfortable to say, look, I think I'm contributing. I would love more of a challenge. I would love to work on, XYZ project, or kind of be part of this program, or work with, this grantee or something like that. But I think it's first you collect information, then you collect feedback, and then you look for the avenues to present that.
That is
And
a
hang in there, because it might be kind of a little bit, it's going to feel a little uphill. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, just based on that, it might feel a little uphill. So think about how you're going to shore yourself up as you climb that hill.
that's a great answer. Thanks, Pratici. So let's jump into some of the questions we had submitted in advance. I know a few of you have asked questions, and we'll try and get to those as well. But this first question around kind of talent management in the field, it's particularly important within mission-driven organizations where part of the understanding is that employees want to leave each day with a sense that the work they did connects directly to impact. Do you think it gets enough attention?
Hmm. That's such a good one. I'm totally biased, so no, I don't think talent ever gets enough attention. Um, but I think that we are getting there. I think that the sector as a whole is really beginning to talk about talent again in a very meaningful way. I think that we are really considering leadership. And I think individually, what I find when I work with organizations is that they are very concerned with making sure that people see and have a direct line of sight from their work to the impact the organization has. It's not always an easy line of sight, because there are lots of things that don't feel like they have a connection. But I think organizations are getting more and more clear about making that clear, whether it is an easy line of sight or not, that they really need to make it clear. So we're getting there. We're getting there. I don't think we're there yet. But I that too sometimes feels a little uphill. But I'm really excited and heartened by how much we're talking about it lately, especially.
Great, great. So building upon that, um, in your experience, what are the barriers to talent management faced by nonprofits? So we've listed a few here: lack of core funding, lack of leadership buy-in, lack of talent management training. But what are the and building on that, what are the best practices, impactful approaches that you've seen to overcome these barriers? And just want to point out, Gwen Hopkins submitted these questions, so thanks so much, Gwen, for submitting in advance.
Excellent. Thank you, Gwen. I love that you're thinking from a sector-wide perspective. I think that's fantastic. Systemically, I think it is absolutely the thing that we're always up against, right? Is that it is, and I know philanthropy thinks about this and the right thing to do in as much as recipients of philanthropic funds think about it, which is, so how do we be smart and purposeful around operating budgets and unrestricted funds, and still be supportive of this kind of work. So I think that's one of the things. It can be a barrier or it can be an opportunity. It really depends on the conversation that's being had and the approach that any particular organization or philanthropy is taking. But I think that's one of the big ones is, are we willing as a sector to say, look, this is so important because without people, nothing gets done, that we are willing to put a stake in the ground and say, look, this is something that we are going to dedicate a resource to. We are going to fund this. We are going to think very seriously about it. We're going to have conversations with our grantees. We're going to have conversations with our constituencies, and we're going to have conversations with our funders and say, look, this is something that's really important and that we have to do. So that, I think, systemically is the thing that's probably, it's happening, but it's not happening all the way across the board. So it is that core funding issue. I think, I mean, by and large, leadership seems to be pretty bought in. They get it. Leadership, at least that I've seen in my travels, get the fact that talent is really important and talent management is really important. That doesn't mean that everybody in every organization has the expertise that they need. So I think because doing talent management, being, paying attention to human capital in the broadest sense is somewhat broader than doing quote unquote HR, right? So it's not a skill set that exists everywhere. And I think we have to be really mindful of that. And it goes back to kind of, okay, so let's get the help that we need. So are we doing that enough? We are. We're getting there. What I see people doing more and more of is exactly that, is that they're getting the help that they need. They're finding it the way that they need to find it. So if they have, if they have a little bit of money, then they'll dedicate some of that to either external expertise or empowering someone inside to really go kind of figure out best practices and talent management capabilities and figure out what that needs to be. I think that's working really, really well. Making it jointly owned by the entire leadership team, as well as anyone who manages people or has any kind of people management aspect to their job, is also something that I'm seeing really, really works. I think the main thing, probably the most basic, no-cost thing that any organization can do and that I think really works is to be purposeful. It really becomes a lens or a filter and a decision-making methodology to say, look, we're really concerned about talent. How is everything that we're doing when we put it through that talent filter or that engagement filter, how's it working for us? And to be very, very purposeful from, the programs that we offer and the way that we serve our constituency to the culture of the organization, the way the money flows through it. All of those things have talent repercussions, and being really purposeful about all those things. That's more of kind of, mindset and discussion. It's not something that requires a lot of resources, and it's incredibly impactful.
Great. Let's jump to a few other questions. Here are a few, but let's start with, I'm committed to my organization's overall mission, but I feel restricted by the nature of my work. So how can I break out of that shell?
Yeah, I love that question. And to grossly oversimplify it, I would say look around and see what needs to be done. Again, I know that's an oversimplification, but think about how that question applies in your situation. Is there something that needs to be done? Is there an openness to considering, hey, look, I don't work in this area, but I would really like to contribute. I'm really passionate about marketing. And so I'm wondering, can I sit in on a couple of meetings? Can I shadow some folks in the marketing arena or in finance or in program or in policy or, whatever the case may be? Where do you see opportunities to contribute? Where do you see opportunities to have the conversation around your wanting to contribute? What conversation do you want to have with people that this is directly impactful to your development with really not that much cost on the behalf of the organization? So this is kind of a win-win situation. And where's the opportunity to have that conversation, whether it's with a manager or a leader or somebody else? And where are you empowered to kind of contribute in a different way? It might be on internal things rather than externally facing things, but really looking for those opportunities.
That makes a lot of sense. So then, this kind of goes hand in hand with the previous question. But how do I change how people see me in the
Yeah,
office?
that's a really good one too. I think it depends on, first of all, understanding how they see you. Because I think we know, but then sometimes we think we know and we don't know. So I think first of all, it's gathering some information from some trusted resources to make sure that you understand how you are seen. If you've done that and you want to change that, first and foremost, I think it's consistency. So if it's something where, people see me as more introverted than I am, and therefore I'm not getting asked to do speaking engagements or something like that, I think it's volunteering and volunteering consistently without being too kind of in your face. Um, if it is being accountable, then I think it's, again, introducing consistency. And I think it's also sharing with people, and this does involve, honestly, some vulnerability, but with the folks that you trust, and if you feel like you can go there, it's sharing, look, I'm really trying to put best foot forward in this area, and I would really love the support and feedback, because this is really meaningful to me, and having that conversation and saying, this is what I'm trying to do. How can you help me with that? Or here's how I would like for you to help me with that. And some of it is honestly just doing it and doing it consistently so that people have a new data set, right? It's about information. If you give them a new set of information, the old one will begin to recede.
Okay, right. And then, kind of in a similar vein, how do I incorporate opportunities to grow into my current role?
I think it goes back to some of the stuff that we talked about, right, in that pyramid chart, right?
Right.
The organization and area and you. It's looking for the opportunities. First of all, it's knowing what opportunities you want. Secondly, it's looking for the opportunities. And third, it's looking for the allies who can help you get those opportunities. I would also look outside the organization. So, are there areas in which you can enhance your communication skills? Is there a board that you can sit on? Is there a way to get involved in your community, whether it is through something as formal as community organization, or if it's something like being on the being on an informal committee in your neighborhood or in your building to get something done. So look at the everything, look at the biggest picture and say, if this is what I want to do, if this is what I want to do, if I want to be a better people manager, communicator, marketer, program person, if I want to be more involved in policy, what are all the different ways that I can do it? And I would literally chunk out all the aspects of your life, professional, personal, otherwise, and really say, so what are the opportunities and how can I enact those? How can I really enact those? And then who am I going to get to help support me in that?
Okay, great. Um, we've had a couple of other questions come in through the question box here in the control panel. And one was from Craig: Are there people, places to learn skills like moderation skills? It seems like Craig um, works with nonprofits who tend to ask um, him to moderate panel discussions. So, do you have any thoughts on that? Or I guess that kind of speaks to, there are some broader questions and implications for that. So, you have any thoughts on that, Pratichi?
Yeah, the best thing I find, there are tons of trainings and things out there around moderating and facilitating. The Management Center comes to mind. I think they actually do some training around that. Um, I'm trying to think who else does it, and it's not coming to me off the top of my head. The best thing you can do for it on an informal basis is to really look at what people do and choose every time you go to something, think of it as a menu and think about what you want to do and what you don't want to do and what you can then incorporate into your own life. And think about how you want to bring that to live in your own life. Even if you're not doing a panel, even if you're just having a conversation with friends, try some stuff out. You're struggling to be heard, then try some techniques out that kind of say, okay, wait, you guys, I have a point to make, right? And I know it sounds ridiculous, but you really can incorporate that without people kind of going, wow, why are you speaking like that? So, but look for those kind of off the wall or seemingly invisible opportunities to practice that. But I really do find that as far as facilitation and moderating, um, it is equally as useful. If you can get to a training, definitely go to a training, but it is equally useful to look at people who are really good at it and people who you think are not, and be very careful. And yeah, I want to do that, and I don't want to do that.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Um, that's great. We're actually just about to hit the 4 o'clock mark. I think we squeezed in just about as many questions as we were able to. We got to a lot. I hope we got to most of yours. You guys can always feel free to follow up and send an email to us or to Pratichi. You can see her contact information is available. And again, if you want to go back and review, if you want to listen to this webinar again, it will be available on the EPIP website. And if you're interested in contacting Pratichi, if you're interested in an EPIP membership as well, feel free to contact me, Michael at epip.org. And thank you all so much for joining us. Pratichi, thank you so much for lending your
Absolutely.
expertise to EPIP members and friends for the hour. I think it was a fabulous learning experience.
I'm so glad. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you guys for attending and participating so much, and giving us your questions and participating in all the polls. Really appreciate it.
Yes, and I can second that. And if we can ask one more thing from those of you still with us, there's a survey, and once the webinar ends, please fill that out. We're always interested to learn more about how we can do a better job and bring great learning opportunities to you. So please complete that survey if you have just a few minutes. And thanks again, Pratichi. Thanks again, everyone. And hopefully we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And have a great Wednesday afternoon and evening. Take care, folks.